Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something, well, something that's all around us, but maybe we don't always have the language for it. We're drawing from a really interesting set of observational notes known as BRISA, the steady rhythm of constant motion.
Right. And it's not a how-to guide. It's not about productivity or anything like that.
Not at all. The whole mission here, and it's a really unique one, is just to observe, to notice the sheer continuous fact of motion in our lives. The tone of these sources is so calm, almost meditative.
It is. It's all about just looking at the patterns of this perpetual forward movement that, well, it kind of defines the modern era.
Exactly. It's not about judging if the motion is good or bad, just noticing the quiet, powerful current we're all swimming in.
That's our mission for this deep dive, really. To just be reflective, guys. We want to help you, the listener, just examine this whole phenomenon of staying in motion.
Through an observational lens.
Purely. Mirroring that source material. We're just trying to identify the patterns, notice the shifts, and really avoid that trap of trying to find a solution or, give advice.
There isn't one offered.
No. And the central paradox that BRISA keeps coming back to, and what we'll be exploring, is this feeling of being constantly in motion, having this momentum, but often without a clear, conscious motivation driving it. It's the difference between, say, rowing hard toward an island you can see versus just being carried along by a strong, steady river current.
And that's what makes this so relevant, I think. For anyone listening, this is about recognizing that subtle flow that might be carrying you forward right now, a flow that's so constant you might not even notice it anymore.
Yeah, BRISA has this great line. It describes it as a perpetually running engine waiting only for friction to fail.
Wow.
The whole system just seems to expect one thing. Keep going.
So I guess the first place to start, the first big structural change is the most fundamental one. The idea that modern days, they just don't really pause anymore.
They don't.
We have to get into what that really means, the disappearance of the pause. Not just emotionally, but structurally.
Absolutely. And to really get it, we have to look back at what a pause used to be, what it actually was.
Right. What was a traditional pause?
Well, it was a mandatory friction point. It was built right into the system. It was defined by physical things, physical transitions.
Like the commute.
The commute is the perfect example. You physically walked out of one door and into another. Or the factory whistle. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an undeniable, objective stop.
You had to physically move away from your desk to eat. You changed your clothes to signal a change in context.
Exactly. These were friction points. They forced a cognitive and a physical halt. There was no choice involved.
And that friction was an external cue, right? It was this loud signal to your brain saying, okay, time to switch gears now. But now, if you look at the modern day, activities aren't really sequential anymore. There are no clean breaks. They're all layered on top of each other, interwoven, often on the same device, in the same chair.
And that's where technology plays such a fascinating role in this continuous operation. Our whole digital infrastructure is engineered to minimize that friction between tasks.
You mean by design?
Oh, absolutely. By design. Think about it. One click takes you from a video call to a Google Doc. Another click takes you from your work email to a personal text message. We have systematically and very successfully optimized for a seamless transition.
And in doing that, we've accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, optimized the pause right out of existence.
We've minimized the need for it and maybe even the capacity for it.
That idea of minimizing friction is so key. If the whole point of the environment is uninterrupted flow, then the system itself is structurally hostile to the very idea of a pause.
It is. You're always in what you could call a soft transition. You never quite land before the next thing, the next notification or task is already pulling you back up.
So what about those clear stopping points? 5 o'clock, time to go home. When those physical boundaries disappear, what happens to the mental ones?
They often disappear right along with them. The brain just doesn't get that external environmental cue that says, okay, you can stop processing this now, you can file it away.
And if there's no external cue, the entire job of creating a pause falls on you, on the individual.
Yes, and that is a huge cognitive burden. It's an enormous ask.
In an environment that's already moving so fast, to deliberately insert a pause requires this active, conscious effort. You have to fight against the inertia.
Stopping is no longer the default state. It's not the resting state. Stopping has become the path of more resistance. Continuing is easier.
So we've shifted from a system of, let's say, scheduled mandatory breaks that you just passively accepted.
Right, like a lunch hour.
To a system where a break is this voluntary, energy-intensive thing you have to actively fight for.
It's the difference between the train pulling into the station on its own and you having to suddenly decide to jump off a moving train. One is easy, the other is, well, it's risky and it takes a lot of effort.
Let's dig into the why of that, though. Why is it so hard to just stop? Is it just a failure of willpower, or is something deeper going on?
I think it's much deeper. This is where the physiological component of the pause becomes so important. That traditional pause, the walk to the car, the train ride, even just changing your clothes, that wasn't wasted time.
It was buffer zone.
A crucial one for regulating our nervous system. That little bit of movement, the change of scenery, it was a signal to your parasympathetic system. It basically told your body that the high alert, high stress context was over.
So it was a downshift.
A necessary downshift. When you move straight from, say, a tense meeting right into making dinner for your kids without that buffer, you get what some researchers call attention residue.
Attention residue. Tell me more about that.
It means your mind is still sort of running the code from the last task. It's still churning, anticipating a response from that email, or replaying a difficult conversation. The pause was how we used to discharge that residue.
And without it,
that context, that task, it just stays perpetually suspended. It's open in the background, like a tab on your computer, ready to be clicked on at the slightest trigger.
So we've basically designed away the reset button for our own nervous systems. It's like running a powerful computer 24/7 on complex programs, but never letting it clear its cache or run a maintenance cycle.
Exactly. The machine technically stays on, but you know its performance is degrading, subtly, quietly, over time.
And you see this colonization of the small spaces, don't you? Those 2 or 5 minutes between back-to-back meetings.
Oh, constantly.
That time used to be for walking to another conference room, getting a glass of water, maybe just saying hello to someone. Now what is it?
It's for checking one more notification, sending one quick reply, or, God forbid, prepping the slides for the very next call you're about to be on. The space hasn't just shrunk, it's been filled. Colonized by continuation.
So it's important to say again, we're just observing a structural shift here from a stop and start rhythm, which really defined the industrial age, to a rhythm that's fundamentally coast and continue. This isn't about blaming people for having bad boundaries. It's about noticing that the basic physics of the day have changed. The gravitational pull is different.
And that pull makes stopping an act that consumes energy. If you don't actively, consciously pump the brakes, and remember, that takes a real cognitive investment, the inertia of the day just keeps you rolling forward.
The momentum, once it gets going, it's self-sustaining.
Because the environment rewards it. It rewards continuation, and it implicitly penalizes slowing down.
So the quiet reality, as the sources put it, is this continuous low-friction operation. We just keep going because there's no built-in braking system anymore. And trying to use our own internal brakes feels like too much work.
And if we accept that the day lacks these mandatory friction points, then we have to look at what that does to our perception of time itself.
Right.
BRISA has this really profound observation about how mornings just blend seamlessly into afternoons now. It robs the day of its internal architecture.
You know, that's so true. Traditionally, morning and afternoon weren't just words on a clock. They were mental frameworks, right? Ways to organize your energy.
Exactly. Mornings were for, the big stuff, the initiation, the strategic thinking, that fresh mind focus.
The heavy cognitive lifting.
Yes. And then afternoons were maybe for more collaborative work or executing on the plan from the morning or just kind of synthesizing things.
They were psychological anchors.
Yeah.
They gave you a structure. You knew noon was coming, so you kind of paced yourself. You had a deadline for that morning sprint.
But that distinction just evaporates the moment the work becomes an uninterrupted stream. There's no true break.
So if you start working on, say, a big report at 9 a.m., and you're still just continuing to work on that same report at 1:30 p.m. without ever having really stopped,
then the boundary between morning and afternoon loses all its meaning. It's just a number on the clock. It has no psychological function anymore.
the structure becomes useless.
And BRISA really emphasizes this point. This blending isn't necessarily frantic or stressful. It's just seamless. It's a smooth, steady, relentless consistency. The gears in your mind never shift. They just keep rotating at the same RPM, whether it's 10 a.m. or 3 p.m. The work all feels the same.
So what's the consequence of that? Of a blurred clock? We talked about attention residue, but what does this do to our memory of the day?
I think the biggest consequence is how hard it becomes to recall specific parts of the day because they don't have any distinctive markers. Think of your day like chapters in a book. If every single page looks identical and there are no chapter breaks, no new titles, no illustrations, no change in tone, the whole thing just blurs together into one long narrative.
You remember that you read the book, but you can't remember where one part ended and the next began.
Precisely. You might remember what you did because the momentum keeps you producing things, but you struggle to remember when you do it or what your mental state was. The events lack an event horizon to make them distinct.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. It's the role of lunch in all this. Lunch used to be the great divider, the hinge point of the entire day.
It was the midday pause sacrament.
But now, for so many people, that half hour isn't a break from the morning task. It's just the period where the morning task eats the afternoon.
Annexes the afternoon. That's a great way to put it.
You're still drafting that report while you're eating your salad. You're checking a few messages, and suddenly you look up, it's 2 o'clock, and you've crossed that meridian without even noticing. You never really left the morning.
That seamlessness is the enemy of segmentation. And those external signals we used to rely on, the lunch bell, the office closing at 5, they're gone. They've been replaced by these weak, subjective, internal signals, like a vague feeling of being tired.
And that internal signal is so easy to ignore when the momentum is strong.
It gets overridden constantly by the inertia of the flow.
Does this change how we pace ourselves? If the whole day just feels like one long, continuous block, how does that affect our sense of endurance?
It has a profound impact on how we perceive duration and effort. Without those chapter breaks, without the ability to mentally close the book on morning and start fresh on afternoon, the whole day's effort feels monolithic.
Like one giant task instead of a series of smaller ones.
Exactly. It feels like one huge energy input rather than 2 manageable sprints with a rest in between. And that can make the day feel disproportionately long when you look back on it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because when every hour feels conceptually the same as the last, time just stretches out. It becomes this indistinct, homogeneous thing. There's no built-in moment to stop and say, okay, first half is done, deep breath. Now for the second half, it's just continue.
I think you've hit on a key insight there. It's the difference between time management and time perception. We might be managing our tasks on a calendar, but our psychological perception of that time is completely warped.
We're using our time, but we're losing our sense of temporal structure.
And losing that structure means we lose a tool for assessment. Right. A bad morning could be contained. You could say, okay, that was a rough morning, and then at noon, you could kind of reset for the afternoon.
You could psychologically archive it. But when it all blurs together, a failure or a frustration at 10 a.m. can just bleed into and color the entire rest of the day because there was no clean break, no moment to reset the clock.
And the source material just presents this as a fact of modern physics. The energy of the system is constant, so the old divisions just don't work anymore.
Right, and the natural consequence of losing the pause and blurring the time is the third major observation in BRISA.
The overlap.
The overlap.
Yeah.
The way work and life have become so deeply intertwined.
And again, it's not framed as this terrible conflict. It's more of a convergence, a quiet reality of being in constant motion.
The 2 spheres aren't fighting for dominance. They're just flowing into the same reservoir. Personal tasks, scheduling a doctor's appointment, texting with a family member, they just trickle seamlessly into what used to be protected work time.
And the reverse is even more powerful. Professional thoughts, rethinking a project plan, checking a work chat just in case, that stuff bleeds constantly into personal time.
And the environment of constant motion is what allows it. It's the facilitator. If you're always moving, the lines between the categories you're moving through are going to get smudged. The lack of any static period means the distinction between work self and home self never gets a chance to solidify.
This brings us right back to that idea of the buffer zone, but in a slightly different context. The commute was the classic buffer. That half hour in the car or on the train,
Yeah.
It was a ritual. It was the time you needed to mentally take off the work hat and get ready to put on the home hat.
It was a psychological airlock. It served a vital function. It told your brain, okay, this context is closing down now, a new one is about to open. That lack of a buffer is what makes the overlap basically inevitable.
There's no space, there's no time that clearly says this is for work and that is for life.
And if that buffer is gone, what happens to your brain's ability to fully switch off one system before turning on the next?
Well, it seems like it's forced to just run both at the same time.
Yeah.
A multi-contextual existence.
It is, and that gets to a really critical question about cognitive load. When work and life overlap this much, their cognitive loads overlap too. The observation is that the mind rarely, if ever, achieves a full context switch anymore.
So we're kind of operating in this perpetual state of low-level background processing for both things at once.
Exactly. That big deadline or that tricky project, it's just quietly running in the background, eating up a little bit of your working memory, even when you're supposed to be doing something totally personal, like watching a movie.
It's just waiting for a moment of downtime to jump back into the foreground.
And our tools are designed to make sure it does. A single notification, a ping from a work app, even if it's not urgent, it acts like a tether. It yanks that professional context right back into your personal space instantly.
What's fascinating here is how the physical location, the home, is being asked to do the impossible.
Right.
It has to be the headquarters for a professional operation. High-stakes decisions, digital communication, and at the same time be the place for relaxation, family, and recovery.
You're forcing these two completely different, very demanding systems to occupy the exact same physical footprint. And that just accelerates the blending. The smell of dinner is mixing with the stress of a presentation. The sound of your kid playing is something you have to filter out with noise-canceling headphones to focus on work.
The physical convergence makes the conceptual overlap almost a foregone conclusion.
It does, and you have to wonder about the psychological weight of that. The sources say it's accepted, it's just the way things are, but it has to redefine what leisure even means.
If your leisure time is always vulnerable to an intrusion from work, is it really restorative?
That's the subtle point, I think. The recovery is compromised not by active work, but by potential work. The energy you spend just monitoring for those incursions, glancing at your phone, deciding if an email is worth answering now, that vigilance is part of the constant motion. It's not rest.
So it all connects. The lack of pauses creates the conditions for time to blur. And that blurred, continuous day is what allows work and life to overlap so completely.
One enables the next. Without a clean pause, there's no clean moment to sever the connection to the previous activity. The whole day just becomes this mixed media canvas where all the colors are bleeding into each other.
And this whole process is driven less by ambition and more by the design of the system itself. The tools, the expectation of being always available, it's a gravitational pull that keeps everything intertwined.
It's the internalization of the expectation of perpetual motion.
Which brings us, I think, to the core philosophical observation of this entire body of work, the big one. The idea that what's driving us, what's carrying us forward, has fundamentally changed. The observation is that momentum often carries people forward far more powerfully than conscious motivation.
This is the deepest insight, I think. It gets to the operational physics of this steady rhythm, and it's important we break down those terms.
Yeah, let's define them in this context.
Okay, so motivation, in the traditional sense, is an active thing. It needs a conscious input of energy, of will. It needs a why. You have to push a mental start button that's tied to a specific goal you want to achieve.
It's intentional. It takes effort to get it going.
Exactly. Momentum, on the other hand, is the sheer inertia of movement that's already happening. It's the simple physical principle that it takes a lot less effort to keep going than it does to stop and then have to start all over again.
Momentum is the path of least resistance.
In a frictionless environment, it's the ultimate path of least resistance. And the observation is that in our current world of continuous flow, we're running less on that intentional fuel of motivation.
And more on just coasting. Coasting on the velocity we've already built up. Things happen because the speed is already there, and just maintaining it is the easiest option.
But where does that initial velocity come from? It can't all just be an accident, can it?
That's a great question. The sources suggest that the initial velocity is established by the design of the systems we use.
You mean like infinite scroll?
Infinite scroll, autoplay videos, the algorithm that's always suggesting the next thing to read or watch or do. These things are all designed to eliminate that moment of decision, that pause where you might stop. They create the flow. That's the momentum.
What's fascinating here is just how efficient momentum is. It completely bypasses the heavy lifting of your executive function. You don't have to bear the mental cost of asking, okay, what should I do next?
Because the stream has already answered for you.
Yes. The next thing is just presented. It's a passive reaction to the flow, not an active decision from your own will.
So it feels like we're optimizing for completion, not for intention. We get really, really good at doing the next thing in the stream, even if we never consciously chose to be in that stream in the first place.
It's an incredibly powerful, self-sustaining loop. But here's the crucial difference between the two. Motivation is goal-oriented. It has a finish line. A project is done, a report is submitted. And reaching that goal naturally creates a pause, a moment of conclusion.
Right. An endpoint.
Momentum is the opposite. It is purely process-oriented. By its very nature, its only goal is to continue. And the frictionless world we've been describing, no pauses, no boundaries, is a world that is built to favor process over goals.
The system doesn't want you to stop and think about the why. It just wants you to maintain velocity and do the next thing.
So what does this all mean for our experience of the day? Well, if momentum is the main driver, the feeling shifts. It's less like you're actively driving your life and more like you're being carried by it.
You're still moving, you're still getting things done, but that sense of agency it's a bit diminished. It's replaced by a kind of surrender to the current.
Which perfectly matches the smooth, steady, forward-moving mood of the source material. It's the difference between steering a boat toward a lighthouse you've chosen.
Which takes constant effort and correction.
And just being on a big, powerful river where trying to stop or change course feels so exhausting that the easiest thing to do is just stay in the middle and let it take you. Momentum buys us efficiency, but the price is a loss of intentionality.
And the sources are so clear that this isn't about the drama of hustle culture or the collapse of burnout. It's something quieter. It's a neutral, sustained velocity.
It's just the operational default. The physics of it are simple. The energy needed to maintain your speed is less than the energy needed to stop or change direction.
You have to wonder about the feeling of satisfaction you get from that, though. Momentum definitely gets things done. It produces output. But does it give you that same internal resonance, that feeling of meaning that comes from doing something you actively willed into being?
That's the question, isn't it? Momentum answers the external demand for progress. Motivation answers the internal need for purpose.
It's a fundamental shift in our daily operational physics. We have built the world optimized for inertia, for continuous flow, and by doing that, we've inadvertently prioritized unintentional movement over intentional action.
And think about decision fatigue. Momentum is the perfect cure for decision fatigue. By reducing the number of choices you have to make, because the next step is always just implied by the flow, we conserve a lot of mental energy.
But the cost of that conservation is that we rarely stop to ask why we're moving in this direction at all. The movement is fast, it's efficient, but it might not be pointed toward anything we consciously chose.
So if you're listening and you ever have that feeling that you're moving very fast, but you're not quite sure who's steering, you're probably just witnessing the dominance of momentum over motivation in your own life.
The force carrying you isn't the fuel you put in the tank this morning. It's the velocity you picked up 3 days ago and haven't had a chance to shed.
It brings it all back to the first point. Momentum is the energy that is created in the space between the non-existent pauses. Since we've gotten rid of all the friction, there's nowhere for that kinetic energy to go. So the forward motion just continues indefinitely.
So we've journeyed through these subtle physics of modern life. We've looked at the steady rhythm of constant motion. We've noticed the structural death of the pause, the way that blurs our sense of time and our personal boundaries, and ultimately this quiet, overwhelming power of momentum as the new default driver of the day. And we've tried to stick to the constraints of the source material, just observing the pattern of continuation, seeing this constant velocity as a neutral, structural thing.
Yeah.
Not a problem we need to fix, but just a pattern to notice in ourselves and in the world.
Right. And as we finish up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought to reflect on. A question, really. If the system we live in is now structurally designed for this continuous, frictionless flow, if stopping has become this deliberate, energy-intensive act you have to fight for, then consider what we lose. Think about the crucial knowledge, the big picture insights, the simple reflective distance that historically we only ever gained in those small fleeting pauses that don't really exist anymore. If the rhythm of life is now defined by the efficiency of momentum, how do we distinguish within ourselves between being truly propelled toward a destination we've chosen and simply being swept along by a current that doesn't really care where we end up? That distinction, which used to be so clear, now requires a level of intentional effort that the entire environment is optimized against, and we'll just leave that question hanging there for you to explore.